I'm going to kick this presentation off, and then Mike's going to talk about the interesting stuff. So I'm a business development manager with Efficiency Nova Scotia. I work primarily with real estate developers, the federal government, and First Nations communities on working on different projects that they have, explaining what our programs are, and bringing their projects through our programs and helping them achieve their incentives and their goals. I'll let Mike introduce himself before I go on.
Yeah, so is that loud? There we go. Hi, I'm Mike Petrosoniak. I'm the energy manager at CFB Halifax. So when it's my turn, I'll give you a bit of an overview of some of the projects that we're working on at the military base. Lots of potential to save energy there. We currently have an energy performance contract underway as well. And I see a few of the people in the room who have worked on that or are working on that. So that's great. And yeah, lots of energy saving opportunities at the base.
Great. So I won't spend too much time on the kind of the introductory slides, since I think most of you are pretty familiar with us, and I see about 10 current or former employees in the audience. So, but basically, Efficiency One is an independent not-for-profit that runs Efficiency Nova Scotia, as well as two subsidiaries, Efficiency One Services and the Halifax Climate Investment Impact something I fund. HCI3. So we are a regulated energy efficiency utility in Nova Scotia. We have targets set by the Utility and Review Board. We go to them with plans every few years to say, here's how much energy we can save, and here's how much it'll cost, and everybody gets to weigh in, and then at the end of that, we come out with a plan to deliver services to all Nova Scotians, all rate classes. And that is the first and still only regulated energy efficiency utility in Canada. And as I said, we offer services to everyone in the province, whether they're residential homeowners right up to the largest industrial clients. And those services include incentives, but we also look at financing, technical support, and installation. Financing is something I'd say is kind of evolving. We're starting to sign memorandums of understanding with Sofiac and Efficiency Capital, as well as our own center with HCI3. So we're very keen to continue exploring that to help people achieve their goals and hit their targets. And something key is that our industry is currently employing 2,600 people and contributes $230 million to the economy annually. And here's some of the impact that has. So something of note is that more than 50% of all residential customers have taken part in our programs, and more than 13,000 businesses, as well as 250 businesses throughout the province that are part of our efficiency trade network or efficiency preferred partners. And that, through efficiency programs alone, Nova Scotians have now reduced their electricity use by 11%, which is more than $1 billion in lifetime savings. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the targets that are in play and what I think we can take out from that as to what the market's looking like in the future. I think most of you guys can probably see the writing on the wall, but always good to kind of zoom out a bit. So the federal government has a Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act, which means that Canada as a whole will be net zero emissions by 2050. That builds on a lot of previous plans like the Pan-Canadian Framework, and it moves Canada towards alignment with the Paris Accord. On top of this, and something Michael will touch on later, is they're also aggressively targeting federal government-owned facilities, departments on retrofits and clean energy purchases. So they're doing a lot themselves, kind of setting by example, and really kind of moving things forward most aggressively at certainly the federal level. In Nova Scotia, We have the ECRA Act, which says that 80% of our energy will be supplied by renewables by 2030, and that coal will be phased out by then as well. But there's also some other interesting things in there that don't get talked about as much around vehicle sales, 30% of vehicle sales to be zero emission by 2030, solid waste, and some of those other things. And similar to the federal government, Nova Scotia's got plans for their provincially owned buildings. So they are any new buildings that are being built or designed starting this past year are being designed to a net zero ready standard, and that will include major retrofits. They haven't quite settled on what net zero ready means, but they're, working towards that. Sam Nachi here is involved in that department as well, so he's keeping on top of that. And, some people will say, oh, these policies are all good, but what's actually happening? So, this is just to show that Nova Scotia has already done a lot. We were the first province to require LED streetlights. More than $18 million being saved across the province because of that, which reduced 30,000 tons of GHGs. That was, 12 years ago that was implemented, maybe more than that. We have more wind power in our mix than almost every other province, and that is, rapidly increasing, as everyone's seen, so it's going to be pretty significant. And, in terms of heat pumps, we have more than 120,000 Nova Scotians that already have heat pumps in their homes. So, when you look at a housing stock of around 400,000, we're well on our way to getting people into heat pump technology, moving that needle for sure. I'm not going to get too far into Halifax because Kevin already talked, but, it is hard to overstate how ambitious Halifax's targets are. They are very much the leader in terms of trying to decarbonize, and their plans, they're kind of mind-boggling how hard it's going to be to achieve that. So, we'll see. They may not achieve every single one. Some of these would be firsts in the country, trying to get to net zero water, wastewater, all new vehicle sales electric. It's pretty impressive. So, what I think we can take away from all those different policies at the different levels is that all buildings in Nova Scotia that exist today are going to need retrofits in the next 26 years. There's maybe, you can probably count the number of net zero buildings in the province today on one hand. It's very, very few. Nearly all heat, hot water, and appliances and vehicles will be electric, or, as I mentioned in the next one, provided heat through district energy or biofuels. So all new construction, we need to be looking at new construction pretty quickly, and certainly Ann's talk and Joe's talk on the new building code moves that needle somewhat, but there's still a ways to go to get to net zero new construction, and heat pumps are going to be key to actually achieve that. And then where our programs fit in with that on the commercial side, I'm not talking about our residential programs today because I think for the most part this is an audience that's working on commercial. So we've got three main programs that kind of provide incentives toward reducing electricity, and the small business program that helps to reduce other fuels as well. So for any facility that's under 350,000 kilowatt hours annually, roughly monthly bills around $3,000, you can go through the small business program, and that can help cover up to 80% of your project costs. So, putting in heat pumps tends to be more kind of the prescriptive measures, lights, pumps, things like that they're targeting. And then business energy rebates is a very similar program offered for buildings above that 350,000 kilowatt hour threshold. It can also target hot water and a few other measures like that. But where we need more people like yourselves is really around our custom programming. So, when we're talking about every building in the province needing retrofits, for the most part, those buildings are going to need some sort of feasibility study, some sort of plan to get there. We have a number of energy managers embedded throughout organizations in the province now, including Mike and some of the work he's going to talk about, to kind of help organizations achieve that. And over the past year, we've launched a few roving energy managers as well for municipalities and industrial facilities to help some of those organizations that can't afford an energy manager by themselves to get to energy savings and into some of our programs. So I'm not going to go into the fine details of it, but basically retrofit is targeting electricity savings in large buildings. And to do that, we're looking at getting feasibility studies from engineering companies that show what kind of energy savings can be achieved at that facility. We'll then review that study and customize an incentive for the customer based on how much energy is going to be saved. And this helps support some of those larger measures that you can't really do in a prescriptive way. It lets you target exactly what's going on in that facility. And then through new construction, Ann and Joe spoke to that already. We're looking at energy models and comparing what a new building is compared to what the baseline building would be and providing incentives on that. And then we can also optimize existing building controls, looking at the equipment you already have and making it run better with studies as well. And some of the newer offerings kind of combine some of this, especially things like pay for performance, where we're looking at how organizations can target a large amount of retrofits at once, either through an energy performance contract or internally. And instead of doing as much work on the feasibility study stage, we can put more work into the measurement and verification stage at the end to show that the energy savings occurred and pay out the incentives that way. So that's for more complex, larger retrofits, which is something that we're seeing more and more of now. I was having a conversation during Ann's talk, so I'm not sure whether she put this exact graph up, but I know she designed it when she was at Efficiency. Okay, so this is a nice chart showing what kinds of technologies you need to get to net zero from where we are today. So one of the key things is reducing your thermal energy demand, so making sure that the heat you're creating stays inside that envelope already, and improving energy efficiency through heat pumps or other fuels, and making sure that the equipment is sized appropriately for the building as well. And then layering on renewable energy at the end. Oops. So, we can see some of the technologies that are best for that. So, to just get to code compliant today, this will change under 2020, some of these things, but, air-to-air heat pumps and HRVs, pretty low-level HRVs will get you there. But once you start moving up the chart to net zero ready or full net zero, that's when you need to start looking at ERVs, better heat pumps, better wall values, or better envelopes overall. So, some of the most efficient buildings in the province actually don't have super efficient heating because they don't need it. If you're building to passive house standard, you don't necessarily need a really good heat pump because it's barely ever going to turn on. A case study, so a project that we worked on was an admin building for the municipality of Argyle. It was built to net zero standard. They've got passive solar heating with that exposure. Unfortunately taken when this picture when that was shaded, but they've got ERVs, they've got a heat wheel, they've got VRF heat pumps, and this was a project that took a long time. They went through a lot of iterations of what they were going to do, but they were really determined to get to net zero, and they were able to achieve that despite being a relatively small municipality with relatively limited funding. They just kind of set their mind to, we need to do this, and they were able to achieve it. And I'd say we're seeing more and more of that across the province, especially with some of the First Nations communities. They're really leading the way with any new builds that they have of basically not building it until they can raise enough funding to make it as energy efficient as possible. And some of that is because they know they don't have the operational funding to be able to operate inefficient buildings anymore too. When you look at the cost of fuel, you can't afford to waste it anymore, right? And most projections are that all fuel cost is going up. So the less you use, the better off you're going to be in the future. So if you want to build a sustainable building financially to be able to continue to operate that, you need to build it sustainably with energy as well. Another example would be Eastport Properties. So they built Canada's first net zero certified warehouse, net zero carbon warehouse. And this is a picture without any lights on in the facility. You could easily work in there without a single light on. And they've now built 5 of these facilities just down the road here in Burnside. And Judy Wall, the president, says that they see this as a real strategic thing as well, that they're competing against perhaps lower cost rent, but when you take total cost of ownership or total cost of lease into perspective, they're actually more attractive for their tenants. And they see this as a way to keep tenants in the long term as well. As well, I mentioned earlier, we have our preferred partner network. So Linda's here. You can speak to her if you're not on that network already. It's a great way to stay informed on our programs and to get leads from customers. We're seeing more and more customers looking for qualified contractors, qualified consultants to work with, and it's always nice when we can point them to people on our preferred partner network. And I'm going to let Mike talk here about some of the work they're doing on the energy manager side and specifically around what they're doing at CFB Halifax.
That's great. Thank you, Kaylin. So yeah, at CFB Halifax, I'll give you an overview of some of the projects that I'm working on and that we're currently working on to implement and help get us some energy savings now and also plan for the future. I'll talk a little bit about a longer-term net zero carbon plan. We don't have the same 2030 goals that HRM has. We're looking at 2050, but we have a strong commitment to get there. So just an overview of the goals of CFB Halifax. So first, we have a federal mandate to get to net zero by 2050. The next 2 points that I have there: maintain operational readiness and minimize disruption to building occupants. Those are 2 important points. So obviously, from my perspective, being the energy manager at the base, my goal is to save us energy and to get to net zero by 2050. But recognizing that we're a military organization, we need to make sure that the building occupants, people fixing parts for ships, Canadian Armed Forces members, they all have sort of the same access to their buildings and what they need out of those buildings at the same time. So, and then finally, responsible use of taxpayer money. So I'll talk a little bit about the EPC. The EPC is great because we have a payback period with it, associated with it, and we basically just set the number of years that we wanted to be, that payback period to be. And so we had some measures that were more expensive and a longer payback, some measures that had a much better payback. And so we had a mix of those measures in the EPC to help retrofit a lot of buildings while maintaining a decent payback period overall. And going forward with that the next step, our net zero carbon plan to get to net zero by 2050, again, we'll be employing definitely a lot of those low-cost, high-impact measures. At the same time, we'll have to be going a step further. We're talking a lot about electrification today and a plan to get off fossil fuels. So we'll see that as I go on here. So this just gives you an overview I did a presentation earlier this year to our management just to give them an idea of our energy usage at the military base, and I decided to put it in terms of GHGs. Obviously, if we have a net zero carbon plan and we want to get there by 2050, we should be looking at our total energy use in terms of GHGs. The biggest piece of the pie there is electricity at almost 70%. Natural gas is the red one. I'm not sure why the label disappeared there, but that one's natural gas. We have four, and that's about 29% there. And most of that usage comes from 4 large central heating plants that we have at the base. So again, talking a lot about electrification today, that's going to be a very big task to take the central heating plants that we have at the Dockyard, Stadacona, Shearwater, down by Eastern Passage, and then Windsor Park and Willow Park in the north end, and find a way to cut that piece of the pie out. And we'll also have to look at what the age of each of those central heating plants are, and we do have till 2050, but we need to decide when it makes sense to convert those over to electric. And maybe it's not as simple as just installing a massive electric boiler. Maybe we need to look at some decentralized heating systems as well. So rather than replacing the natural gas just with an electric boiler and then pumping the steam around to our various buildings, that's how we have it right now at those sites. Maybe it means installing more heat pumps at each building individually. We also see fuel oil with about 5% of the GHG production. So we still have oil heating at a number of our buildings. Those tend to be more we have 36 sites in total, and so I just mentioned 4 of them that have the big central heating plants. So those obviously represent the biggest usage for us, but we have many of our smaller sites that are on oil or propane or those sorts of things. So we'll have to think about those as well. Obviously, those will have sort of a smaller impact in the overall, but important not to forget about those ones. So just a few key points taking from that graph there. I already touched on a few of them. So electricity, 69%, natural gas, sorry, I said 29% earlier, but it's actually 25%. So we can see there, between those two, that's combining for 94% of our energy-related GHGs. So recognizing that we've signed on to the Green Choice program, it was planned to be implemented by end of 2025, but more likely for us, in some recent meetings, it's looking more around 2027. I'm glad to see it making progress, and that essentially that big chunk of the GHGs associated with our electricity will have a drastic reduction. I'm not going to say that wind turbines and solar has a zero impact, but it definitely brings it down quite substantially. Natural gas, so I've talked about this a little bit already, but a need to electrify heating. So we have our 4 large central heating plants, and we still also need to find heating solutions for our smaller sites. So again, I'll touch on that a little later, but that may look like some microgrids at some sites where we almost try to get them off the grid, or maybe still tied into the grid, but producing some electricity on site and then powering heat pumps and stuff on site as well. I just have at the bottom there, so the two last little points on that graph were propane and diesel. Propane was about 1%, and diesel is just under 1%. Diesel is going to be a hard one to get rid of. That's for our generators, so if there's a hurricane that comes or just another power outage or something, we need to maintain that electricity supply for certain of our buildings, and so that will probably be one of the last ones that we take care of. GHG emission trends for DND Atlantic. This shows the graphs for the 4 bases in Atlantic. The one at the bottom there, that one is Halifax. There's also Greenwood on there, Gander, Gagetown, and then overall for Atlantic. So we can see already from 2005 that we've dropped off about 40% from our 2005 baseline. Now, a big part of that is that the Nova Scotia grid has been gradually getting greener. Another big part of it is that we've been using natural gas in the place of oil heating in several of our buildings as well. So just to kind of do a high-level order of implementation of types of measures. So I talked about it a little previously, but efficiency measures often have the best payback. These are what are currently make up the bulk of our EPC. That's where we can get quick wins, save energy, and help fund some of the other energy solutions that we bring in later. Clean electricity through the Green Choice program. So obviously, if we can cut as much energy usage as we can, and then we electrify, and then we use clean electricity for the rest of it, then we can bring that big chunk that we saw earlier of GHGs for electricity usage closer to zero. Electrifying our heating, that's going to be a huge task. Figuring out a way to get off natural gas for our 4 large central heating plants, that will be something that we'll figure out in this next phase in this net zero carbon plan. And then at the bottom there, probably the most expensive per return that we get would be on-site generation and microgrids. So this is one of the projects that we've had that is sort of one of those quick wins that I talked about earlier. It's a lighting retrofit, saved a pretty decent amount of electricity, and the payback on it was about 6 years. And so a great way to cut down on our electricity usage, save some energy, and help fund future projects. An important point to note there is the third point there. So project initiated to respond to complaints of low lighting. So it's actually the building occupants who sort of fueled this or initiated the project. We had heard, it's I think the biggest building at CFB Halifax, 365,000 square feet. So it's pretty massive. And the building occupants had been complaining about low lighting. A lot of them had task lights in their area for where they were doing work. And so it was great after the implementation of it. We did hear a lot of feedback. Task lights also started disappearing, and people were able to do the work that they needed to do with simply the overhead lighting. So it's a little hard to show in a picture, but you can see that to the right there, each light looks a little brighter. Walking through the building, it definitely made a big difference. So yeah, our EPC, I've talked about it, referenced it a little bit here. So the project was awarded in June 2021. It's a $54 million contract. The payback period was set at 15 years. It started out, I believe, around $20 million, and it kind of grew from there. Just the realization that, hey, we're doing this project, we can include more and more buildings. It has 112 buildings out of approximately the 600 buildings that we have at the base. And to be honest, it could probably have grown from there as well. But at some point, you kind of have to set a scope and set a size to it. It'll reduce our energy spending by about $3 million and cut out about 15,000 tons of GHGs per year. This is a list of the general measures that we have with the EPC. The top two there, lighting and recommissioning, those are two of the ones that have, again, I talked about before, but that low cost, quick payback period, and that helped drive a lot of the other upgrades that we did across the base. We also, in addition to these general measures, that's why they have the G in front of them, there's also several specific measures. So a certain building might have needed an air curtain if they had bay doors that were open and a lot of air escaping, losing conditioned air. We'd install those at certain buildings. These were ones that we said, okay, here are the general measures, let's apply these at all of the applicable buildings across those 112. So that brings me to that next project, that sort of that next phase, building off the EPC, the net zero carbon plan. So we just submitted the consultant briefing to Defense Construction Canada is an organization that it's also another federal body. Essentially, they help manage our contracts for us, or they do manage our contracts for us. So DND will submit, hey, we have this piece of work. Here you go, DCC. DCC finds a consultant or a contractor, depending on what you're doing, whether it's construction or a design, and they go out and find them and get them to work on that project. So that was just recently put out. So that's in progress. Again, the plan with it will be efficiency measures at all non-EPC buildings first and foremost. So anything that the EPC didn't cover, let's get those efficiency measures and some of those low cost and quick payback period measures done first. From there, Green Choice Program, we're already enrolled in that. We're hoping to see full implementation of it by 2027. And again, thinking back to that graph where we had that big chunk for electricity, that's the plan is for that to bring that down to zero. Electrifying our heating. Again, this will be a huge part of our net zero carbon plan. So we will have to find a way to get that remaining chunk of natural gas down to zero as well, or close to zero. And so the net zero carbon plan will look to evaluate, do we go with just replacing it on large central heating plants simply to electric boilers? We already have the infrastructure in place for pipes for steam and or hot water to carry it through buildings. Or do we go with more of a decentralized system where we have heat pumps and geothermal and that sort of thing in individual buildings? We're also going to have to work with the utility to ensure adequate electrical distribution. So I see a few folks from NSPI. So we had a meeting on site at Dockyard a few months back, and we were looking for, hey, where can we put a transformer? We recognize the fact that if we're looking to electrify a lot of our heating, we're also going to be needing to upgrade the distribution capacity pretty hugely. Is hugely a word? Largely. Yeah, I also touched on earlier microgrid technologies for more remote sites. So at places where they're not sort of part of the Dockyard, Stadacona, Shearwater, the sites close to the city, we will look at some microgrid type setups for those. Yeah, so as part of that microgrid topic, on-site generation, electrical storage where it makes sense. And the last point, so out of that going back to that pie graph, that smallest piece of the pie there, diesel generators. So eventually, and I think this will be probably one of the last things that we'll do, we'll be looking to replace those diesel generators with hydrogen fuel cells, electrical storage, other methods. And yeah, so that's a little overview of what we're doing at CFB Halifax. Some of the projects that we've already done, some of the projects that are ongoing are EPC mainly, and where we're looking to for the future. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to start with a couple of questions. I'm going to kick off with one of the questions. Regarding the adoption for NECB 2020, when Efficiency Nova Scotia is thinking about switching from 2020 to 2017, and the second question would be, can you speak about the challenges to reach the energy saving targets or carbon emission reduction targets that Efficiency Nova Scotia has as a company?
Sure. So on the first one around NECB, I guess we're going by when the building permit's pulled, what code applies to the building permit for that site. So, effectively any building permits that start after Jan 1 next year, theoretically should have the new code applied, and that would be the baseline on those buildings. So that's the easy answer. The other one, our CEO speaking at lunchtime, he may be a little more tuned into that question. But I mean, the main issue right now is the way our funding is structured for commercial, institutional, industrial sites is still almost entirely targeting electricity reductions, which is great. But if you're starting with an oil, natural gas baseline, we can't incentivize you to go electric. So, you know, that's the major challenge we have in our programs today, is that we don't have incentives to help people reduce their non-electric fuels. And certainly, you know, the writing's on the wall in terms of where a lot of that is going to be going, right? There's not a lot of options out there. Either you're moving to electricity or you're moving to a non-emitting biofuel or district heating solution. So,
any question?
I guess just sort of a follow-up on that, Keelan. I was under the impression that for efficiency's next plan, DSM-funded plan, that beneficial electrification will be included. So has there been any, I guess, further direction on what that would look like for the industry?
Short answer is no. So yes, beneficial electrification will be included in the next plan we filed to the Utility and Review Board, which will be 2026 to 2030 is the period it will cover. We are starting to design that plan now. We will be getting stakeholder input into that plan, absolutely. So, I mean, we definitely want to hear from lots of different people on what that should include, what it should look like. Today, I don't think there's a lot of insight into what that looks like, but Steve may have a better idea on that as well.
More questions? Okay. So, well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.